Recognizes a quorum. Can I have a motion on the minutes for March 6th?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Minutes from March 6th have been moved. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion passes. Thank you. First only bill on the calendar for today is House File 1054. Representative Clark. Members, just to give you an idea how we plan to proceed today, we will give an opportunity for the proponents of the bill to testify. After they've been given their time, out of respect for the individuals who came here today, members of the public, each testifier will be given 2 minutes. My staff will keep time after that. When the testifiers have 15 seconds left, a yellow card will be held up, and when the testifier's time is complete, a red card will be held up, at which time I will notify the testifier they are to stop their testimony. This is because we have many people signed up. After testimony is complete, members of the committee will have an opportunity to speak. Also, aside from the author's amendment, no amendments have been filed. Therefore, it will be a debate on the bill as it stands. And after that, we will take a vote. That vote will happen before midnight. But after the committee time this morning, the committee will reconvene at 6 p.m. promptly. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And can you tell us, share with us how many testifiers are on the docket?
I believe it's approximately 60.
And are they in any particular order? You going opponents, proponents, or are you mixing them in?
Yes, Representative Scott, we will be going proponents and opponents. And I would note that approximately 75% of the testifiers who signed up designated themselves as proponents, and approximately 25% designated themselves as opponents. But we will, at least at the start, be going proponent-opponent.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Representative Clark, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Well, I'm really happy to be here and to play a part in moving Minnesota forward. I was here 20 years ago as the chief author also when we passed the historic Minnesota Human Rights Act that added those words sexual orientation to the Minnesota Human Rights Law in order to protect our gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender Minnesotans from unlawful discrimination in employment, housing, public services, access to education, access to credit, and public accommodations. The passage of that law had taken 20 years of discussion in our communities and at the legislature before that could happen. This bill, House File 1054, has taken another 20 years to bring to a vote in the legislature. And this time our vote is guided and strengthened by last November's historic and resounding defeat of the anti-gay constitutional amendment against same-sex marriage by Minnesota voters. In November, Minnesotans said no to using our Constitution to permanently limit the basic freedoms of some to marry. That historic vote happened after more than 2 years of intense discussion among our citizenry. All over our state, Minnesotans were deeply engaged in discussions about marriage being about the love, commitment, and responsibility that two people share. Many families from all corners of the state, from all faiths, all classes, all race, all political affiliations, came out in support of same-sex couples and the families that they know, love, and respect in their own lives, in their own communities. I want to pass out something here. I'm passing out a photo that's very near and dear to me, and if some of you visit me in my office, you'll see this photo. Where is it? I'll start by just saying in Minnesota, we don't turn our backs on family. The photo that you're looking at is the photo that was taken in June 1993 at the Minneapolis Gay Pride Parade right after we amended the Minnesota Human Rights Act to include sexual orientation. If you look there, you'll see me without my gray hair, my partner of 24 years, Jacqueline, my mother, two other family friends, and my father way over on the right. And read what the sign says. My parents proudly carried a sign that said, "Our gay children should have the same rights as our heterosexual children." They carried that, and my mother told me that she cried all the way walking down the street carrying this because she was so moved and proud of what had happened and wanted to share that feeling, deep feeling. If either of my parents were alive today, I'm sure they would be here to say that no member of anyone's family, gay or straight, should be singled out and denied the basic freedom to marry simply because of who we are. Like so many other Minnesotans who voted to defeat the anti-gay marriage constitutional amendment last fall, my family knew and knows firsthand that same-sex couples pay taxes, vote, serve in the military, take care of their kids and their elders, and run businesses in Minnesota. We work hard and contribute to the same Minnesota system as everyone else. Committed same-sex couples should be treated fairly under the law, including the freedom to marry the person they love. I think it's clear now that Minnesotans believe that marriage is a unique promise of love, commitment, responsibility, and fidelity that two people share. That we believe in treating others the way we would want to be treated, and none of us would want to be told that it is illegal to marry the person we love. Freedom means freedom for everyone. Unfortunately, here in Minnesota, same-sex couples are still excluded from marriage. A poll taken by Minnesota United for All Families found that an overwhelming 72% of Minnesotans believe that these bills would either have a positive or minor or no impact on their lives. Real Minnesota families will be strengthened and thousands of children will be protected by passing this important bill today. Again, just a reminder, Minnesotans from every faith and political background are urging the legislature to take action this year, and that includes same-sex couples, and to include same-sex couples in the freedom to marry. This discussion that I've had with many of you, my colleagues, has led to today's vote. It's discussion that many of us have had with our colleagues and constituents throughout the state. Like the law that we passed 20 years ago, some of the discussion that we're having today reminds me a lot of that discussion. And what I kept hearing from colleagues in those days, even those who were struggling very hard with how to vote on this, said, I'm going to vote for that bill to amend the Minnesota Human Rights Act because it's the right thing to do. And I believe it's time for us to do the right thing again now, that no Minnesotan should be told that it's illegal to marry the person they love. And that includes me and many people that you all know and love. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just briefly go through the bill.
Representative Clark, go ahead.
Okay. I believe we have an amendment, and if someone could move that, then it'll make it.
Representative Simon moves the. Representative Simon moves the A1 amendment. In order to get the bill in the shape the author so desires, all in favor of the A1 amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say no.
No.
Motion passes. Thank you, Representative Clark.
Okay, so just briefly, and I know we'll have more time to discuss all the particulars, but the first section amends the Human Rights Act to expand religious freedom.
Mr. Chair?
Representative Scott.
Yes, if the author could explain what the amendment does, please.
Oh, sure.
Representative Clark.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Representative Scott, it exchanges the word union for organization when it's talking about labor unions, because that is the language that's used in the Minnesota Human Rights Act and other places where we're talking about labor unions. And then the page 4, deleting line 8 to 11, deletes the federal law language. Mr. Chair.
Representative Scott.
Yes, if I could ask Representative Clark a question.
Go ahead, Representative Scott.
Could you explain the ramifications of removing that section, please?
Representative Clark.
Mr. Chair, it takes out the compliance with federal law, and so we're just dealing with our Minnesota statutes, not with federal law. And I think one of the things is that it's clear there's no fiscal note that is applicable to this bill then.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so what you're saying with this amendment then is, regardless of what federal law says, that state law would trump, if this law passes, the state law would trump whatever the federal law says.
Representative Clark.
I don't know if Trump would be the word I'd use. What I'd say is that state law here will be operative in Minnesota, and federal law, we're not applying federal law to our state law.
Thank you.
So,
Clark.
as I was saying, the first section amends the Minnesota Human Rights Act to expand religious freedom, and it specifically ensures freedom of religious institutions, nonprofit, religious corporations, and affiliated educational institutions to refuse to participate in a marriage to which they object on religious grounds. So it makes that clear. And it allows those religious entities to refuse goods, services, facilities, and accommodations to such marriage ceremonies and celebrations. Section 2 changes the Minnesota law to permit marriage between two persons, regardless of the gender of the spouses. Reaffirms that marriage in Minnesota is a civil contract. It leaves previous state law intact regarding the requirements for solemnization of marriage, presence of two witnesses, licensure, and so on. Section 3 amends the Minnesota law to remove same-sex union from the list of specifically prohibited marriages, and it repeals the prohibition on recognizing same-sex marriages from other states. Section 4 replaces a single reference to bride and groom with parties, and the requirement that newly married couples must provide their address on their marriage license application. Section 5 removes the gender-specific references in the requirements for solemnizing a marriage. It also protects the exclusive freedom of religious entities to preserve their own religious doctrine on the question of who may marry within their faith. Finally, it forbids any fine, pursuit, or penalty.
Representative Simon?
I'm sorry, Representative Clark and members. I think there's a typo on line 3.26. Just before we left that section, I talked about this morning with Mr. Gehring. I think he can verify this, that the citation is just off. I'm sure it was a mistake, but instead of 517.08, it should be 517.04, just to get it in the shape it's supposed to be in, because 517.08 has to do with marriage licenses. 517.04 is the statute that is titled Persons Authorized to Perform Marriages, and I think that's what the author meant there, clearly.
Okay.
And Representative Simon offers that oral amendment as stated on line 3.26, changing 517.08 to 517.04.
Right. And can I just check, Mr. Gehring, is that accurate? Is my statement accurate in terms of for Ms. Mullen?
Mr. Chair, Representative Simon, I think that's correct. So the cross-reference should be 517.04 in that line.
Okay.
Thank you. Then all in favor of the oral amendment as stated signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Motion passes. Thank you, Representative Clark. Please proceed.
Thank you. Section 6 contains two provisions. The first makes it clear that this marriage bill will make no change in the individual human rights and expansive religious freedom protections that are already contained in the 20-year-old Minnesota Human Rights Act. It ensures that the marriage bill has no effect on pre-existing anti-discrimination law, which means it does not increase the legal liability of any person, business, labor union, or religious institution. It expressly states that the marriage law will not impose legal liability on nonprofit religious institutions for providing adoption, foster care, and or social services, provided that they do not accept public money for these specific services. The second provision, because we removed the federal one, the second provision removes gender-specific rights and responsibilities of spouses and parents under Minnesota law, makes them applicable regardless of gender. Section 7 equalizes the availability of divorce for same-sex and opposite-sex couples under the state law. Current law requires that a person seeking divorce must live in Minnesota for 180 days prior to filing. This section allows couples to seek a divorce in Minnesota courts if they were validly married in Minnesota, but now live in a state where they are denied divorce because of their sex or sexual orientation. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I know we have many witnesses, and so I'll just wait. I know we'll have questions on the bill later. I guess that's what we're doing this evening, so I thank you for that opportunity to present the bill, and if we could begin with the witnesses, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Representative Clark. Then we'll begin with the first testifier, Reverend Jerry McAfee, New Salem Missionary Baptist Church. Reverend McAfee. We'll move on to the next opponent, Pastor Gus Booth, War Road Community Church. And while Mr. Booth is on his way down here to testify, I will notify members that due to the sheer number of testifiers, in order to ensure that everyone gets an opportunity, we will limit testimony to 2 minutes. A sign will be held up when you have 15 seconds left, and when the stop sign is held up, you need to stop. Also, members, there will be no applause or otherwise any kinds of adulation or expressions of dissatisfaction with testimony. This is a hearing where we expect both sides to be afforded respect in their testimony. Thank you. With that, Reverend Booth.
Good morning. I'd like to point out that this bill does not adequately protect religious liberties. That's a big deal. It's a constitutional deal. At best, it only concerns itself with what goes inside the church and not about religious liberty outside the church. In fact, as I'm sure you know, people are already uncomfortable voicing their support for traditional marriage outside of church based on their religious beliefs of fear of being labeled a bigot or narrow-minded or holier-than-thou kind of person. I think if gay marriage is legalized, it's abundantly clear this will only get worse. And I feel like, why must the rights of conscience continually bow to redefine marriage? Should a person's beliefs be confined to the four walls of their church? We've seen that this has happened to parents, business owners who exercise their rights of conscience in other states where same-sex marriage has been legalized. And there are protections for the religious liberties of individuals, parents, and business owners who are not affiliated with any other church or religious organization. I feel like we didn't vote to legalize same-sex marriage this last November, and with this legislation, with respect, it's just overreaching, and it's not the will of the people. Before the election, we were told that we could vote against the marriage amendment and nothing would change. We were told that if the amendment was defeated, our marriage laws wouldn't change and same-sex marriage would remain illegal. We now know that we were sold a false bill of goods. In fact, it didn't take more than a month before the mask was pulled off, and we learned that the real objective was to defeat the amendment and then to force gay marriage on all Minnesotans. And in northern Minnesota, we don't appreciate this kind of bait-and-switch tactic. This false labeling continues as some on this committee and the legislature are saying that the defeat of the marriage amendment means that people in Minnesota have been given a mandate to legalize same-sex marriage, and it's just crazy. It's not true. As you know, I'm a pastor and a leader in my community, and I want to make it clear that the vast majority of people of my district, the House district and the Senate district, voted to pass the marriage amendment by huge margins. 66% in the House district, 65.6% in the Senate district. And many of you have said that you are listening to your constituents, and I urge you to listen and remember your constituents and how they voted.
Pastor Booth, please wrap up your testimony.
Yes, 10 seconds. These numbers aren't isolated.
Please end your testimony, Reverend Booth. Please wrap it up.
Okay.
Final sentence.
Those numbers are not just in my district. They are all around the greater state. And it's just the metro area that's wanting to force this on the whole state and not the rest of us.
Thank you for your testimony. Yep. Next testifier, Dr. Paul Melkert, American Pediatric Association.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you today on behalf of the House File 1054. My name is Dr. Paul Melkert. I'm a pediatrician, a father, and also a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is a national organization of more than 62,000 pediatricians committed to the attainment of the optimal physical, mental, and social health and well-being of all children and young adults. The American Academy of Pediatrics supports marriage equality for all capable and consenting adults, including those of the same gender, as a means of guaranteeing all federal and state rights and benefits as a means to ensure the long-term security for their children. Freedom means freedom for everyone. Equality means equality for everyone. And security should be secured for all children. Civil marriage should be a social institution that promotes healthy families regardless of whether they are headed by a same or opposite gendered partners. It confers a powerful set of rights, benefits, and protections that cannot be obtained by any other means. By denying marriage equality, this can greatly threaten children's access to health insurance and also to health care services. The board of the Minnesota chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics unanimously voted to uphold the rights of family and children to the legal, financial, and psychosocial security that comes from having legally recognized parents who are committed to each other and to the welfare of their children. Security comes through love and commitment, not through sexual orientation. All families benefit from the assurance that comes from knowing your family is safe, secure, and afforded equal protection under the law. There is broad consensus by all medical professional organizations based on hundreds of papers and more than 30 years of research that there is no relationship between a parent's sexual orientation and any measure of a child's emotional, psychosocial, or behavioral adjustment. Rather, children's optimal development seems to be more influenced by the nature of the relationships and interactions of the family than the particular structural form it takes. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Melkert. Next testifier, Pastor Wayne Maxwell, Woodland Bible Church. Pastor Maxwell. Next testifier, Professor Teresa Collette, St. Thomas University.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Teresa Collette. I'm a professor of law at the University of St. Thomas, where I teach constitutional litigation. I've been involved in the issue of attempts to redefine marriage for almost a decade now. I'm here today to provide my personal, professional opinion and do not represent the University of St. Thomas in the views I'm about to express. There are two main points in the limited time I have before this committee I would like to make. First, no one's children are protected or their interests advanced by redefining marriage. Marriage is the only civil institution that ensures that every child is both legally and connected to their biological parents, their mother and their father. There is no child that has ever been born into this world that did not have a biological mother and a biological father. We need to maintain the current definition of marriage in order to protect that particular association, because social science confirms what common sense and tradition has told us for generations, and that is children do best when raised in the permanent committed relationship of both a mother and a father. Generally, each parent of a different sex contributes different characteristics and enhances different virtues in their children. While it is true that there are many other arrangements in which children have been successfully reared, the simple fact is it is beyond dispute that the optimal setting is between a mother and a father. This particular bill would require us not only to sacrifice that principle of civil society, but also to sacrifice our most precious liberties. The protections that are afforded for freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and freedom of religion in this particular legislation are inadequate and will not protect those of us who believe that marriage should remain between a man and a woman. Students throughout this country have been subjected to expulsion and to silencing in public schools, as have other professionals. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this committee today.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Professor Collette. The next testimony will be from Randy, Phil, and Jake Raitan. And after that, we will have Ms. Grace Evans, accompanied by Jeff Evans. So please be prepared to proceed. Please take a seat, introduce yourself for the record, and begin your testimony.
Hello, I'm Rondi Rayton, and we're here as a family. This is my husband, Philip, and our youngest son, Jacob. We love Jacob so very much. We come today to you as a family with dreams. Dreams that one day soon, Minnesota will be a state that grants our son, Jacob, the freedom to marry. We want for Jacob what has been so precious to us for 40 years. We want Jacob to have the joy of a wedding, the firm foundation a marriage brings to families, and the societal support that comes with all marriage.
Jacob came out 15 years ago. Rondi and I didn't know anyone. We didn't know what it meant to be gay. We didn't have any gay friends. We simply didn't understand. Nor had we ever faced the discrimination that followed. Jacob was patient with us. He led us. We found precious friends in the gay community, and they enriched our lives. We have been on a journey as a family ever since, working to see the day of equality. Our family longs to rejoice at Jacob's wedding.
Over the past few years, I've stood by the side of each of my 3 siblings as they married the ones they love. The locations of their nuptials were scenic and special. My eldest brother, Ben, on the sands of a beach in San Diego. My other brother, Josh, in the quaint backyard of the St. Paul College Club. And my sister, Britta, on the beautiful Mississippi River at the Nicollet Island Pavilion. During each ceremony, I wiped away tears as my siblings exchanged vows and forged new families with their beloved. And after each ceremony, I took pen to paper and signed marriage licenses for each couple. By doing so, I made official in the eyes of the government what was already official in the hearts of the newlyweds. As a gay man, I should have the same opportunity to marry as my 3 siblings. My desire to love is no less valid and no less worthy of recognition by our state than theirs. My ability to enjoy the rights and responsibility of marriage is in your hands, and I hope you'll treat me as you would treat my siblings, or your siblings, or your children, or yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next testifier, Ms. Grace Evans, and subsequent to that, we will have testimony by Karen Wills. Ms. Grace Evans. Ms. Evans, please introduce yourself for the record.
My name is Grace Evans, and I want to thank you for letting me speak today. Even though I'm only 11 years old, I know that everyone deserves to have a mom and a dad. If you change the law that says 2 moms or 2 dads could get married, it would take away something very important for children like me across the state. My mom is very important to me because she teaches me about things about being a girl. She is kind, thoughtful, gentle, and beautiful. She cares for me and others and listens very well to things I want to talk to them about. I am learning from her to be a good woman, wife, and mother someday. Even though I learned some of these things from my dad, my mom teaches them in a very special way. Without my mom, it would be very hard for me to learn them. She is my role model on how to be a girl, and I love her very much. My dad is also very important to me because he protects me and helps me get the confidence to be a girl who is growing up to be a woman. He takes care of problems in a way that my mom cannot. Just like my mom wouldn't be able to be the woman she is without my dad. I wouldn't be able to be the woman I want to be without my dad. Because he is strong, wise, and different than my mom, I learned things from him that I would not be able to learn in the same way from my mom. Since every child needs a mom and a dad to be born, I don't think we can change that children need a mom and a dad. I believe God made it that way. I know some disagree, but I want to ask you this question. Which parent do I not need, my mom or my dad? I'll ask again, which parent do I not need, my mom or my dad? I hope that you can see that every child needs a mom and a dad. Please don't change your law on marriage to say otherwise. Thank you for letting me speak today.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Evans. Next testifier is Karen Wills, Minnesota Psychological Association. After that, we'll have testimony from Jason Adkins, Director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference. Paige will please distribute the handout. Please take your seat and state your name for the record, Ms. Wills.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Dr. Karen Wills. I've been a licensed clinical child psychologist for 30 years, with 15 at hospitals in Rochester, Minnesota, and Minneapolis. It feels right to support HF 1054 today on Mental Health Day at the Capitol. Last year, Minnesota's psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, and marriage and family therapists reached a consensus. Our professional ethics, our clinical wisdom as therapists, and our review of authoritative scientific research led state and national mental health associations to support marriage equality. Psychologically, marriage is a deeply meaningful stage in the personal and family life cycle. It's more than a legal contract, more than a civil union. Far from seeking to redefine marriage, most same-sex couples hope to participate fully in marriages aligned with their faith tradition and their family tradition for all the same reasons other people do. As they care for each other, for children, for elderly relatives, legal protections become essential to family security. Newlyweds are rooted in family, accepted or not. Marriage preserves the family tree and creates a new branch. And what matters to children into adulthood is how well their family branch functions. Kids do better when parents communicate with love, respect, and reasonable rules, whether their household is headed by 2 men, 2 women, or one of each. And there is no evidence that children do best with 1 man and 1 woman as parents. The Regnerus study, which you'll hear about, and I passed out a handout about, of unhappy people who claim that their parents had same-sex affairs does not pertain to children from functioning families. Kids and adults with same-sex parents do just as well as anyone else, and those families do even better in accepting communities that treat them fairly. Here are decades of data, but I'm out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Wills. Next testifier is Mr. Jason Adkins, Executive Director of Minnesota Catholic Conference. Subsequent to that, we will have Kate Wolf.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Jason Adkins. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference, which is the public policy voice of the Catholic Church in Minnesota. The Church's opposition to marriage redefinition is well known, and the reasons can be found in many places, and I need not repeat them all here. I did want to take on the common assertion, namely that the current definition of marriage, because it is supported by particular faith communities, though opposed by others, constitutes an impermissible imposition of one supposedly religious definition at the exclusion of others. Therefore, it is claimed we need a neutral definition that allows all groups to marry who they want. This claim is utterly false, as the proposed statute is not religiously or morally neutral. What is at stake are 2 competing visions of the human person and the institution of marriage. The operative question is not which religious group or groups supports which understanding. The question is which one is more rational and best serves the well-being of persons and society. The current definition of marriage accounts for how persons are created as male and female, made for life and made for each other. It is only in this particular human union, rooted in the gender differences of men and women, in which children can result and which provides the best context for their nurture and care. The alternative being proposed, far from being value neutral, communicates and enshrines in our law a number of falsehoods, most particularly that gender is irrelevant or merely a social construct, an identity that we can put on or take off like a pair of jeans, that human nature is plastic and that men and women are essentially interchangeable parts, that a mother and a father are not particularly important for child well-being, that the marriage of a man and woman is not necessary nor necessarily the ideal place to create and raise a child, that important pre-political social institutions can be redefined by the state at will, and that the state has the power or even the jurisdiction to do so. We recognize that there are many well-intentioned people who simply want to get married and have a marriage license, but we have to recognize that there are deeper ideological issues at stake and that we need to consider the consequences for all of society. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Adkins. Next testifier will be Kate Wolf, and subsequent to that, we will have Ms. Erin Sorensen. Please introduce yourself for the record and begin your testimony.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Kate Wolf, and I'm here to speak in support of House File 1054. When I met Mary Ann in 1980, I knew she was the one. There was no doubt in my mind that she was the person I was meant to spend the rest of my life with. We shared the same traditional ideas, that marriage was about love, caring, and commitment to one person for life. Without the legal ability to marry, we exchanged rings and committed privately to each other. In 2000, Vermont became the first state to permit civil unions of same-sex couples. We were joined there in civil union on our 20th anniversary. Our love and commitment to each other was finally recognized somewhere, but it wasn't our home, and civil union status implied that we weren't good enough to be married. In 2005, Canada recognized the freedom of same-sex couples to marry. We traveled to Toronto and were married by a minister from the United Church of Canada. Our vows were from the 16th century Book of Common Prayer. After 25 years of waiting, we were legally married. It was the best day of my life. Then we returned to Minnesota. We were hit with the reality that our marriage was no longer recognized when we were processed separately at customs. Now, when we are asked our marital status on official forms, we don't know what to say. Some places consider us married, others consider us strangers. When we travel, we carry our marriage certificate, our living wills, and our power of attorney forms. As we grow older, we worry about what will happen if one of us is hospitalized. Will we be able to see each other or make important medical decisions? Marriage is important. It provides stability in our communities. It sets an example of long-term, faithful commitment, allows a couple to care for and protect each other and our families, and helps couples honor their commitment until death. Recognizing our marriage and allowing other couples like us to marry doesn't redefine marriage. It honors the tradition of marriage. I ask you to please support House File 1054. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Wolf. Next testifier is Ms. Erin Sorensen. Subsequent to that, we will have Marilyn Carlson Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee members for allowing me to be here today. My name is Erin Sorensen, and I'm a graduating senior at Northwestern College. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today and share a portion of my beliefs on the issue of marriage facing society today. As an advocate for marriage remaining between one man and one woman, I feel compelled in urging you against allowing this bill to redefine the definition of marriage. This bill would not only redefine marriage for those whose interest it is serving, but would redefine marriage for everyone in society today. Yes, society is changing and fluctuating, but our traditional definition of marriage should not. This bill would shift our focus away from the interests of our future children and towards the image of two parents regardless of their gender. Coming from a family who strongly upholds this belief has affirmed me in my decision today. The committed relationship between my mother and my father is an image I hold and hope to aspire to one day. This bill would distort that image. I know and understand the consequences the passing of this bill would bring, which is why I'm standing firm upon my belief today in choosing the right for my future children. Our country was established upon traditional values, those of which we still uphold today. A new contemporary vision upon marriage has not benefited us thus far and has caused much division and much separation in our society, which is why now, more than ever, we need to cling to those beliefs that we know to be true and to be right. The recent vote on the marriage amendment did not represent the entire youth of Minnesota, and I'm a strong advocate of marriage remaining between one man and one woman. I can affirm you in the beliefs of my generation today, those of a solid foundation of a home. Today, I trust you with the future definition of marriage for myself, our future children, and society. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Sorensen. Next testifier, Marilyn Carlson Nelson. Subsequent to that, we will have Doug Mainwaring.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Representative Clark, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm Marilyn Carlson Nelson, the chair of Carlson. Last year, I spoke out against the amendment that threatened to enshrine discrimination against gay marriage in our state constitution. In their wisdom, the voters of Minnesota rejected that amendment, making our state the first in the nation to strike a blow against this kind of discrimination, which I felt was entirely consistent with the values that I grew up with in this state of inclusion, tolerance, and caring culture. It's now time to finish what we started. As a business owner, I must stress that Minnesota cannot afford to disadvantage itself in the workplace, particularly among the next generation of workers, those under 45 whom research shows favor the freedom to marry 2 to 1. At a time when our own state demographer warns that our annual labor force growth will drop to nearly zero in the next dozen years as baby boomers retire, we must aggressively retain our own brilliant young students and attract others to our state. These are essential to infusing our state with energy and innovation and leadership we need to continue to be competitive. And these young people, for the most part, are not attracted to discriminatory environments in which to live and work. That's one reason why so many of our Minnesota companies have already been speaking out on gay equality. Hundreds of businesses, including the majority of our state's Fortune 500 companies, grant partner health benefits. Workplace policies, I assure you, are not a substitute for equal rights under the law. As a CEO, I can tell you, it does not work to have second-class citizens in any corporation or any state. So I'm here today to talk about business, but also about the unfinished business. We must fully live up to our Minnesota values of inclusiveness and human dignity. I say thank you. To continue to have our gay citizens and their children have full rights under the law. If we don't, it's no more than adult bullying, and we must end it. When this day is done, I hope that others may look to us and say that Minnesota got it right from start to finish. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson, for your testimony. Next testifier will be Doug Mainwaring, and followed by Mr. Mainwaring will be Laura Nelson and Kelly Olmstead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Doug Mainwaring. I'm gay, and for a very long time I was pro same-sex marriage. After all, it only seemed fair and equitable until I began to consider why I supported it. I'm the dedicated father of 2 teenage boys. After their mother and I divorced, I began dreaming about marrying a man to join me in raising my kids. It slowly dawned on me that even if I found another man who was as dedicated to my kids as I, my exact double, there would be a gaping hole in that household and in my sons' lives. 2 men or 2 women in a relationship is not exactly the same as a man and a woman. Children need and deserve both a mom and a dad. To the male parents in this committee, if you vote for this legislation, this is a declaration that your wife plays no particular role in your kids' lives. And to the moms, a vote for this legislation indicates your husband is expendable. Same-sex marriage will not redefine marriage, it will undefine and unravel it. And in so doing, it will undefine children. This is not progressive legislation, it is regressive. This isn't the first time our society has undefined marriage. No-fault divorce sounded like a great idea at the time, but children became collateral damage, chattel in the selfish pursuits of adults. Same-sex marriage will bring us further down that path, depriving children of their right to a mom or a dad. Don't allow the demands of adults claiming they're entitled to fulfillment to trump the rights and needs of kids. To the committee members and your fellow legislators, ignore the media's constant manufactured urgency to institute same-sex marriage. There is an agenda to weaken family life and to produce a populace which is more dependent on government and more receptive to greater government intrusion in our lives. It is not homophobic to oppose same-sex marriage. Marriage is not about love, commitment, and responsibility. It's about kids, and we should tremble in fear at the notion of undoing it. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Mainwaring. Next testifiers will be Laura Nelson and Kelly Olmstead, followed by Ms. Nelson and Olmstead will be Grace Fink.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Laura Nelson Olmstead, and this is my wife, Kelly Olmstead. Thank you for allowing us to testify. We do have a handout, if I could hand it to the...
Please, the page will distribute Ms. Nelson's handout.
Thank you. On August 15th, 2009, Kelly and I stood before our friends and family, and we exchanged vows. We promised to love each other, to trust each other, to walk through this life together. As I assume yours did, our wedding included laughter, tears, good food, music, and a lot of love. What our wedding did not have, what our marriage still does not have, is any recognition by the state we call home. After our wedding, we started a family. Our son Eli was born in June of 2010. And in the sleepless nights, in the groggy mornings that followed, Kelly and I leaned into each other. We leaned into our love as we learned the ropes, just like any other new parents. In May 2011, our daughter Alexis was born. And just as we did with her brother, we packed a bag for the hospital with our camera and baby clothes. And we also included our power of attorney and our medical directive in case something happened to me while I was in labor or after our daughter was born, because Kelly would need to step in, and legally we're strangers. These days, our lives are filled with story time and blocks, Play-Doh, dolls, the occasional toddler drama. It's amazing. It's exhausting at times. It's family. Kelly and I are both attorneys, and we have cobbled together through contracts, second parent adoptions, medical directives, powers of attorney, as much protection as we can for our family. But it is not enough. It is not marriage. We still feel vulnerable. We don't know how well it will hold up if it's ever tested. And we're the lucky ones. Through our education and our resources, we have the ability to have at least these basic protections. But you have the ability today, you have the ability this session, to recognize that there are families just like ours all across Minnesota. Families that are built on love, families that need and that deserve the same protections and the same rights as any other family in Minnesota. I ask you today to support House File 1054. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Nelson. Thank you, Ms. Olmstead. Next testifier is Grace Fink, followed by Ms. Fink will be Mitch Azarkan. Ms. Grace Fink. Okay, here's the next one. Next testifier, Lindsay Warkenton. Ms. Warkenton, please introduce yourself for the record and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for allowing me to be here today. My name is Lindsay Workington, and I'm 17 years old. Because of my age, I was unable to vote this past fall, so I really do appreciate you taking the time to hear my voice. A lot of people assume that since I am young, I do not care about serious subjects, such as marriage. This is untrue for both me and many of my classmates. This topic is very important to me, and the conclusion will affect both me, my future children, and future generations. Marriage is not merely a legal status to be rearranged through political process. The history of marriage transcends modern law, and in essence is not defined a topic that politicians nor society define. I've heard that marriage must be redefined because the current definition inhibits love, free expression, and is not equal. Marriage is the only way. If marriage is the only way to express intimacy, then the free love from the 60s is void. Society has shifted morally throughout history, but never until now have politicians in America felt compelled to redefine a term that predates the 13 colonies by thousands of years. Call same-sex relationships what you will, but do you really have the authority to call it marriage? What is wrong with polygamy? Is it love or is it equal? What is wrong with living together? Is it love or is it equal? Maybe you can attempt to redefine love, but please do not seek to redefine marriage. The movement to redefine marriage is really a rebellion against society's past and against a political worldview or a biblical worldview. You can make up your own terms, but you did not define marriage, and therefore you cannot redefine it either. Please do not redefine that which you, nor I, nor your ancestors defined. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Warkenton. Next testifier will be Mitch Azarkan.
Mr. Chair and committee members, good morning and thank you. My name is Mitch Azarkan. I live in Rochester, Minnesota, where I work as a surgical cord tech at Rochester Methodist Hospital. I'm also a proud SEIU, Healthcare Minnesota member. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today about why the freedom to marry is important to me and why I support Senate File 925 and House File 1054. Growing up, I had seen how much love my parents and grandparents had for each other. They were committed to each other till the very end. And they remain my role models to this day. When my grandfather died, my grandmother passed away shortly after. We all knew that she couldn't continue to live without her best friend. My parents was married for 25 years, and that only ended when my father had passed on as well. My mother is a widower now and has never remarried. To me, marriage is about love and commitment. The vow of to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part, is a vow that should not be afforded to only between one man and one woman. It should be for all couples, and that includes gay and lesbian couples who are also willing to make that same commitment with their partners. Chairman and committee members, when you look at me, I want you to see a lesbian with hopes and aspirations of being able to marry the woman that I love someday and start a family. When you look at me, I want you to see a labor leader who believes and upholds the dignity and worth of all workers. I want you to see my union, who is advocating for marriage for me and all our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. And lastly, when you look at me, I want you to see a citizen who loves this country. A citizen who believes in the promise of an America that will continue to stand for freedom, equality, and justice. An America that will continue to hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is why I support SF 925 and HF 1054.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Archon. Next testifier, Mike Frye.
Each committee member should have had a handout in their packet. I'll be referring to that in my testimony.
Committee page, please pass out. Oh, it's in the packet. Thank you.
In the packet. Yes, sir. My name is Mike Frye, and I speak as a concerned Minnesotan and father and a husband. And the thing about same-sex marriage is that people who marry do have sex. And when same-sex people are married, they do have sex. There's something called sodomy. Sodomy, defined in Minnesota, is sex by or with the mouth or through the anus. When there's ejaculation into a vagina, there's a barrier there, as in your packet it states there, of a cellular tissue that doesn't allow the sperm that has an enzyme at the head of it to penetrate the blood flow. It is designed to go to the egg. That enzyme is designed to burn the outside membrane of the egg cell, go inside the egg, and then deposit the DNA. We call that conception. When ejaculation occurs inside of a colon, it's highly absorbent material. The cells do not have a barrier for the sperm and those enzymes to enter into the blood flow. When the enzymes enter into the blood flow and a continued prolonged environment to that happens, these enzymes in the blood flow, it causes what we know as AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. And AIDS, of course, brings on common diseases, colds, and things, and it magnifies them to a point where it's unhealthy. Not only does it strengthen the disease within the carrier of AIDS, but it also, with a person that has a destroyed immune system, but it also strengthens the disease that can be spread to the society at large. There's an example in Los Angeles County in California where among the gay community, a rash, almost like boils, and a very raw skin broke out on the hands, feet, butt, mouth of these gay communities, and they couldn't find a cure for it for a long time. These doctors called the Center for Disease Control, and they couldn't find this cure for it. The cure they found, a very extraneous antibiotic, was Zyvox. It cost $2,400 for 1 course of use. I urge you to vote against the changes inside this bill because it's going to put a health risk to the society at large, and it's going to put a financial burden on the people of Minnesota to be able to support all the diseases that will come out of this. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Frye. Next testimony will be from Eric Strand, Edina Community Lutheran Church. Subsequent to that will be Professor... Oh, understood. So there's no one else on the list. Testimony after... Eric Strand will be Cian Patrice Becker and Laura Marie Kazmarek.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to testify in support of House File 1054. My name is Pastor Eric Strand. I'm pastor at Edina Community Lutheran Church and has served as a pastor there for 24 years. I come here today as a pastor, as a Christian, but also as a husband and as a father and as a grandfather, to ask that you vote yes to ensure that same-gender couples have the same opportunity to marry in Minnesota as straight couples. I've been a pastor for almost 34 years and been privileged to participate in the significant moments of many lives. Hundreds of baptisms, marriages, and funerals, all events where family and friends and larger community gather to support one another. In particular, I've been blessed to share in the celebrations of marriage, where two people come to make public promises to one another, promises to be with and for the other in all that is to come, whether it be joys or sorrows. We in the church believe that these promises of lifelong until death do us part promises reflect God's promises to creation and to humanity. We also believe that these public events allow and invite family and friends and community to make promises of support and accountability to the couple. And it is such promises that marriages become events of joy and celebration in the strengthening of human community. But I've also witnessed same-gender couples make the same promises of love and commitment with little support from their government or from larger community institutions. As a person who regularly prays and reads Scripture, I am led to advocate for policies and laws which will enhance and provide protections for all couples who choose to make such wonderful, bold commitments as marriage. This, I believe, will build up the common good for all citizens. As a person of faith, I would advocate for the full support of the law to deepen and strengthen the promises that all couples make in our religious ceremonies and rites. Thank you for your time and letting me testify.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strand. Next testifier is Cian Patrice Becker and Laura Marie Kazmarek. Subsequent to that will be Doug Donnelly, University Baptist Church.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Clark.
Could I just let you know that I am being called to another committee to vote? It's not my disrespect for the committee, but I'll be back as soon as I'm done voting.
Understood. Thank you, Representative Clark. Please introduce yourself for the record and begin your testimony.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to share our thoughts with you today. My name is Cian Becker, and this is, in 9 other states in Washington, D.C., along with 11 countries and parts of Mexico. Laura, who is my legally recognized wife, but in our home state of Minnesota, we are legal strangers. We got married legally on April 28, 2008, just over the border outside of Thunder Bay, Canada. It was a beautiful ceremony that celebrated our love and commitment to each other. You don't know how much it meant to us when the chaplain said, "I now declare you legally married." We had never felt so validated. Unfortunately, when we got to the border to cross back into Minnesota, that validation slipped away, and we felt the reality of being second-class citizens once again.
We aren't asking for special rights. We are asking for equal rights. Cian and I have a relationship that is based on the traditional values of respect, trust, communication, love, and support, just like a heterosexual relationship. We met, dated, and fell in love. We would like to take the next step and become legally married here in Minnesota, but we cannot. Our discriminatory law prohibits us from getting married and even from having our marriage legally recognized.
You have the opportunity to be leaders and role models today and to make a real difference in the lives of many thousands of Minnesotans. Allowing HF 1054 to go to the floor for a vote would mean that you value your LGBT families, friends, and constituents. Your support today will signify that we have indeed come a long way. Please support HF 1054 and send it to the House floor for a vote. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Becker and Ms. Kazmarek. Next testifier, Doug Donnelly, University Baptist Church. And subsequent to Mr. Donnelly will be Russ Stanton, Director of Government Relations, Interfaculty Organization.
Good morning. My name is Doug Donnelly, and I have the honor of serving alongside the good people of University Baptist Church in Minneapolis as their pastor. I'm so glad that the House is considering this bill. It's high time that all Minnesotans are granted the freedom to marry the love of their lives and have those unions recognized by the state. We ought not relegate certain people to second-class citizenship. Restricting marriage rights only to one class of people is beneath us as a state. I come here as a Baptist minister. Baptists believe that everyone has the right and responsibility to interpret Scripture for themselves. We make our own decisions about how we govern our churches, whom we call as our leaders, and whom we marry within our walls. The Baptist experiment is all about protecting the freedom of the minority. The way the current legislation reads, restricting marriage reads, it limits our religious freedom. In fact, it codifies one interpretation of Scripture into our law. I have no doubt that well-meaning people wrote that legislation, but it's outdated. And it is the state making law based upon one interpretation of Scripture. Those who faithfully read Scripture as saying that God recognizes and affirms all people regardless of sexual orientation are being discriminated against. To say nothing of our LGBT sisters and brothers who don't get the 515 benefits granted by law to married couples. I've been a pastor for over 23 years. I've officiated at dozens of weddings over my career. Most of them have been opposite-sex marriages, and some have been same-sex marriages. And each time I preside at a wedding, gay or straight, I find that my marriage to my wife is strengthened and enhanced. Love begets love. Granting the freedom to marry the love of one's life enhances love and stabilizes society. Heck, it's conservative. I stand by the freedom of those who love each other and who are committed to the sacrifice and gift of marriage, and to declare that all ought to have that brave union recognized by the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donnelly. Next testifier, Russ Stanton, Director of Government Relations, Interfaculty Organization. Subsequent to Mr. Stanton will be Neil Tao, Professor, Program Director, and Chair of the Social Work Department of Metropolitan State University. And after that will be David Wheeler, Minister and Member of the United Methodists for Marriage Equality. Please proceed, Mr. Stanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Russ Stanton. I'm Director of Government Relations for the Interfaculty Organization, which is the union for the faculty at Minnesota's 7 state universities. We strongly support marriage equality, and we urge you to pass 1054. Our main reason, of course, for supporting passage is because we believe that our gay and lesbian members, like all citizens across this state, deserve the right to marry the person they love. But we also support this legislation for more pragmatic reasons. It is important for the recruitment and retention of faculty at our state universities. Our state universities recruit faculty from all over the United States and the world. Many of the faculty that we try to recruit are in committed same-sex relations. However, with a growing number of states and countries, including Iowa on our south border and Canada on our north border, allowing equal marriage, and an even larger number offering equal domestic partner benefits, we're at a disadvantage. What married couple from New York or Iowa would want to come to work in Minnesota if their marriage is no longer recognized and their benefits would no longer be equal? The inequality of benefits for gay couples in our state universities is substantial. For instance, gay and lesbian employees are ineligible for family coverage under our state health plan. That benefit alone is worth about $10,000 a year. We find it extremely unfair that gay members of our union who are just as talented, who work just as hard, who pay equal dues and pay equal taxes, are denied equal benefits to their married colleagues. While we have long supported equal domestic partner benefits, we think the most efficient way, the most effective way of achieving equality is to simply allow equal marriage. Passing marriage equality will allow many Minnesotans to live happier, more fulfilled lives, and it hurts no one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Stanton. Mr. Neil Tao. Subsequent to Mr. Tao will be David Wheeler. I'm not seeing Mr. Tao, so Mr. Wheeler, would you please come testify?
Chair Lesh, committee members, thank you. Delighted to be here. I'm wearing 3 hats, and when you're as bald as I am, it's a good idea to wear several hats. I'm a citizen, and that's really the most important of all the offices I hold. My second office is that I'm a United Methodist pastor. I've served churches around the state of Minnesota, and I did the wedding for my niece and my nephew, and I have another nephew who's gay, and he hasn't decided yet to be married, but it would be pretty hard for me to be able to do his siblings' service and not be able to do his. I really believe that this law will strengthen families and marriage. It's no threat to anybody else. And it will value people and will make a difference. Now, I'm an elected public official. I was first elected as a Duluth City Councilor, like somebody else who's sitting here today, many years ago. And I sponsored the Human Rights Amendment in Duluth back in the mid-'90s, and we passed it over the veto of a very conservative Christian mayor. And I really believe that it's very vital as an elected person that we stand for human rights for all people. But it's not just about rights, it's about marriage, it's about commitment, it's about love, it's about making a difference. I also serve now on the Board of Estimate and Taxation for the City of Minneapolis. And we set the local property tax levy, which is kind of important in terms of what happens in the life of the city. And we want to have as many families and couples within Minneapolis, and we have a wonderful variety of people who will continue to be involved in our economic life. We heard from Marilyn, Carlson, Nelson what a huge difference this really makes in our economy, and I think that's important. I just want to end by saying that you've all been elected to lead, not to follow, to lead. This is the year to do it, and the reason it's the year to do it is next year's an election year, and you need to get out in front of the voters and say yes to all Minnesotans. Thank you very much for your hard work, and we look forward to a great result.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Wheeler. Next testifier is Tatey Benson, and subsequent to that, we will have Robert Lauser and Dwayne Bandel.
Hello, Chair and committee members. My name is Tatiana Benson, and I've lived in St. Paul my whole life. And 5 years ago, I started working for St. Paul Parks and Recreation. I worked my way up from YJC, which for those who don't know is Youth Job Corps, to a rec leader at Hancock Recreation Center. When I got my promotion, I signed up for my union card with AFSCME, and that is how I came to speak with you guys today. Now, today I've been asked to speak about my opinion on the marriage bill and its importance to me. As a member of the queer community, this bill holds great importance to me. Yes, Minnesota defeated the marriage amendment in November, but that was just something that prevented us from moving backwards in our state. This bill that has been proposed will allow many members of the LGBTQIA community to grasp onto one aspect of equality, one that the community has been waiting for a long time. Personally, this bill will allow me to dream a little bit further into my future. Yes, I can dream about my life with my girlfriend, but if this bill is legalized, I can think of the possibility of having a wife that is recognized by the state. As a city employee that works hard to provide opportunities for many Minnesotan families and their children, I would love to have an equal opportunity to start my own family. I know AFSCME was a significant supporter of the Vote No campaign, and although they have not taken a stance yet, I, as an AFSCME member, stand in support of the marriage bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Benson. Next testifier, Robert Lauser and Dwayne Bandel. Subsequent to that will be John Patrick Green III. Members, I would note for the testifiers, please also, I think there's someone following around trying to ensure that you get signed in. The page is doing that. Please be responsive to that, either before you're testifying or subsequent you're testifying. We need to have everyone who testifies sign in. Thank you. Please introduce yourself and proceed for the record.
Mr. Chair and committee members, my name's Jim Lauser, and this is my husband, Dwayne Bandel. We own a house in the Kingfield neighborhood of South Minneapolis. We were married in Vancouver, British Columbia on July 19, 2006, our 20th anniversary. Marriage equality has been the law in Canada since 2005. Our Canadian marriage is valid and recognized in 10 other countries and counting, including France later this year. In none of these countries has marriage equality created any problems. We want our marriage to be valid and recognized in our own state, the place where we live and pay taxes. We met in Rochester in 1986, and we've been together ever since. It's been amazing to us that until we told people we were getting married, very few understood the relationship. Until our marriage in 2006, people, including friends, family, coworkers, and neighbors, weren't really sure what we were. People thought we were business partners. Some people thought we were father and son. Once we were married, everybody got it. Because marriage is a term that's universally understood, and no term clearly defines the relationship between two people better.
In 2006, before our marriage, we mailed a letter to family and friends explaining why we had decided to get married in Canada. Here is part of what we said. We believe in a world of love, compassion, and mutual respect, a world free from fear, discrimination, and prejudice. We believe in a world where all individuals enjoy equal rights as well as equal responsibilities. We believe that we deserve exactly the same privileges as every other committed and loving couple, regardless of gender, race, religious preference, or sexual orientation. In the over 26 years that we have been together, we have faced a number of challenges. However, one challenge we faced showed the difference being a legally married couple or next of kin can make. In early spring of 2002, we decided to pay a lawyer to draft legal documents that would guarantee us certain rights that most straight couples take for granted. These rights include inheritance, durable power of attorney, and the right to make healthcare decisions for each other as stated in a healthcare directive. Since we are not legally married, we had to each pay the lawyer separately. Coincidentally, a few weeks after the papers were signed, I was rushed by ambulance to the hospital where I received an AIDS diagnosis. After a series of illnesses, near-death experience, and hospitalizations, doctor's visits, and medical tests, it was determined that I had probably been HIV positive since the mid-1980s. After my diagnosis and 2 hospitalizations, I spent the next 5 months at home recovering and working hard to regain my strength and weight. During my hospitalization and throughout my recovery, Jim was able to take sick time from his job to care for me only because his supervisor allowed it, not because she was legally obligated, since Jim is not my legal spouse. One thing we learned through all of this, if we hadn't paid the lawyer to obtain those documents, Jim would not have been able to be with me in the hospital or help me with my plans or decisions during recovery. In fact, the first day I was in the hospital near death, the doctors told Jim to go home and get the paperwork for my medical records.
Please conclude your testimony, Mr. Bendel.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Next testifier will be John Patrick Green. Followed by Mr. Green will be Mr. David Patton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Hi, my name is John Green. I was raised in Matamidi. On April 1st, 1985, I was born into a family headed by 2 women. My grandparents were skeptical, yet when they saw the love that radiated from the face of a healthy baby boy and his 2 beaming mothers, they had no choice but to believe. My mom's taught me about the history of our great state, our noble country, and the values of equality that form the foundation of our democracy. The stories they read me each and every night illuminated the beautiful world we live in and unveiled the love that swells in every one of our souls. Our family isn't so different from any Minnesota family. At home, we enjoy family dinners, Sunday mornings at church, commiseration about the lackluster play of the Vikings. We talk about my search to find a woman who I can love as my parents have taught me to. But we have our difficulties too. We argue. We struggle to support a small family business. But as a loving family, we are equipped to handle these issues by ourselves. All we expect from the government is equal and fair treatment under the law. Marriage is about love, family, children. As a child of 2 women, I've turned out all right. I captained 2 sports in high school, graduated from one of the most selective colleges in the country, and I have a 3.92 GPA and a grueling Masters of Architecture program at the University of Minnesota. If I were your son, committee members, I think I would make you very proud. I believe in the values that my parents taught me: tolerance, the inherent dignity of all human beings, equality, and freedom. It's time that the law of our state fully recognizes these values too. Let us take this opportunity to assert that all loving families deserve equal treatment under the law, that all children deserve the kind of childhood I experienced. It's not unusual. It's what happens in families that love each other. It just works. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Green. Next testifier will be David Patton. Followed by David Patton will be Chip Martin and Bill Chafee.
Mr. Chairman, I've given a photo to share with the committee.
Excellent. The page will please distribute the photo. Please introduce yourself for the record, Mr. Patton, and begin your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify. My name is David Patton, and I speak in support. I was here 2 years ago, and I'm back to remind all those folks who are worried about the children of gay parents, we're doing fine. Thank you. George and my dad have been together for over 30 years. They both had a hand in raising me. They taught me to watch out for others, to be kind. You'd be amazed to find out what gay dads can teach you about how to impress women. They taught me that the most important thing is creating memories with the people you love. We'd see theater and ballet and play games. We'd go on vacations. We'd eat frog legs and snails and sharks and all the grody things that boys like. They invested their time and their love in us. They gave us everything that parents should. That's what I want from my boy Anderson. A whole belly full of happy memories with his family. You know, as a kid, I never knew that George was my family. Back then, nobody ever told me that. In society's eyes, when two people marry, a family is created. My dad and George couldn't marry, and so our family didn't count. Today, my son calls George granddad because we are family. I worry about the children in Minnesota who are wondering today if their family is a real family. I worry about my son Anderson. And I worry that he's going to grow up and he's going to fall in love, and somebody's going to tell him that his love and his family don't count. Pass this bill. Protect our children. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Patton. Next testifier is Chip Martin and Bill Chafee. Followed by that will be Professor Robert Oscar Lopez. Please introduce yourself and begin your testimony.
Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Chip Martin, and this is Bill Chafee. We both live in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Thank you very much for allowing us to testify in support of HF 1054 today. Bill and I have been in a loving and committed relationship for the last 8 years. 4 years ago, we adopted our daughter, Olivia, and 2 years later, our son, Landon, came along.
The adoption process was initially fearful, and we were unsure of the reaction to expect from our friends and family. Fortunately, as we began to let people know of our plans for adoption, support gathered behind us. We are continually amazed with the ease of how well we fit into virtually every aspect of our children's lives. Preschool, our neighborhood, our church.
We feel incredible support from so many of our friends, family, and community members. We have realized there are many different types of normal families with parents who may be biological, adoptive, step, foster, grandparents, and other configurations that make up the adults in many thriving families. We are a family just like any other family, and no family is less deserving or less worthy than any other.
We're simply two adoptive parents in a suburban neighborhood surrounded by liberals and conservatives who support us and our family. We're here today because our children deserve to have the same stability that marriage brings to all other families with legally married parents in our community.
I would very much one day like to answer Olivia's questions differently. When she asked me, Daddy Chip, are you and Daddy Bill married?
No, Olivia, some people won't let us get married because they don't understand that we're a family. They don't understand that Daddy Chip and I love each other.
I cannot wait for the day that I can respond with something more like,
we're planning on getting married real soon, just like Uncle Brandon and Auntie Erica did.
In Olivia's eyes, we are just like other families, and she simply cannot comprehend why we don't have the same rights as everyone else that she sees in her life.
We look forward to the day when we can walk down the aisle together and profess our love and commitment in front of God, family, and friends, with Olivia and Landon as our flower girl and ring bearer.
Mr. Chairman and members of this committee, thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin and Mr. Chafee. Next testifier, Professor Robert Oscar Lopez. Thank you. And after that will be Mr. Bill Chadwick.
Chairman, representatives, thank you. I've spent 40 years in the LGBT community because I was raised by a lesbian with the help of her female partner, and I came out as bisexual over 20 years ago. I'm also a humanities scholar with 15 years of experience as a professor, and I reject the notion that there is any consensus on any side about same-sex parenting in any academic discipline. Same-sex love and same-sex parenting same-sex parenting and same-sex marriage have been intertwined in this debate, and this places me in a conflict of conscience. I know that couples like my mother and her partner deserve to have their love recognized, but I also know as a child in that situation that there is something missing when you have a parent of one sex that is not there. I only have 2 minutes here and can't begin to address the many reasons that we need to slow down in the rush to same-sex marriage. Doug Mainwaring and I have founded the CFA, or the Site for Ethical Family Alternatives, which we are launching to try to bring together LGBT voices from left and right to have the debate that has not taken place yet in the United States. We've heard a lot from religious objectors to homosexuality, and we've heard a lot from LGBT activists who feel that they have earned property rights to children through their activism. We have not heard from people on the left who are worried about the social justice concerns of international exploitation through surrogacy contracts with poor women in the third world. We haven't heard about 13th Amendment violations in the buying and selling of children to meet a market demand for same-sex couple parenting, or the social inequality that gay marriage may worsen among LGBTs ourselves. We have not heard enough from children's rights advocates about the full debate on whether a child has a right to a mother and a father, how or whether this law might encourage more divorce among fragile mixed orientation marriages that already exist, or the extent to which legalizing gay marriage may transform children from free citizens entrusted to those who conceived them into the property of adults who acquire them. So I say we need more time. There is no rush. I've been in the LGBT community for 40 years. We'll get by, we'll survive. Our relationships are doing, pretty well. Let's take time to really try to consider all of the different aspects of this before we rush into something that might have unintended consequences. And on unintended consequences, I just want to point out that I had to clean out a lot of apartments of people who died of AIDS. And in the 1970s, when people drastically changed sexual culture, they could not have foreseen that that disease was going to happen. So we have to ask, what are the unforeseen consequences of making a change this big? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony, Professor Lopez. Next testifier, Mr. Bill Chadwick, and subsequent to Mr. Chadwick will be David Cobb.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity, Chairman Lesh and other representatives. Thank you for your good work on behalf of the state of Minnesota. I'm pastor of Oak Grove Presbyterian Church, Bill Chadwick. One of the millions of people of faith that over the years have changed our minds on this issue. I may speak personally. My younger brother John and I were extremely close growing up. I was very excited when we started having kids. I didn't have any of my own. I loved being an uncle. Claire and Jim, his children, grew up in the church that I now serve. When Claire grew up, she married a wonderful young man 3 years ago. Jim is now a senior in college, but he will not be able to marry the one he loves. By the time he was 3 years old, I knew that Jim was gay. Jim didn't choose that. Current law, I've had the deep honor to officiate at the weddings of 4 of my nieces. Current state law infringes on my freedom of religion to officiate at Jim's marriage. One comic has said, "Let gays marry. Why shouldn't they be as miserable as the rest of us?" Well, that may or may not be a funny line, but most of the time I'm not miserable. My marriage means the world to me. My wife Chris and I are coming up on 25 years of marriage next month. And a civil union just wouldn't cut it for us. Our marriage is a place of safety, commitment, companionship, intimacy, trust. And those things all can happen without marriage, but our relationship is acknowledged, encouraged, and celebrated by the world. And why shouldn't Jim receive that same acknowledgement, encouragement, and celebration? Simply because of the way he was born. Marriage says we are family in a way that no other word does. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Chadwick, Mr. David Cobb, Spirit of Joy Christian Church. And subsequent to that will be Lynn Osterman. Not seeing Mr. Cobb approach. Lynn Osterman. Welcome to the committee. Former Representative Osterman, please introduce yourself for the record and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I apologize for my voice this morning. I'm suffering a cold. I'm Lynn Osterman from New Hope, and I thank you sincerely for the opportunity to be part of this discussion. When I was a sophomore in college, I set the goal to serve in the Minnesota House of Representatives. And when I got here, thinking I was going to be a thoughtful citizen legislator, I was ill-prepared for the partisanship that greeted my class, the chair's class of 2002. I served as a Republican because of my interest in smaller government. And it was incredibly counterintuitive to me to then, upon my arrival, tell citizens how the government wanted them to live their lives. I didn't come to St. Paul to single out same-sex couples and their families, but in my only term as a member, I cast a politically expedient vote in favor of DOMA, and I have regretted that ever since. It was not my conscience or my own compass. My dad is a retired Presbyterian minister. In fact, he served the congregation that Reverend Chadwick now serves. I've heard lots of Bible-based sermons over the years, and never once did I hear that someone else's love was somehow lesser than the love between my parents of now 55 years. My husband of almost 26 years and I have established and demonstrated our decision-making priorities with our two children, stressing people are more important. It's never been well except for those people. Nothing in my life says it's okay to treat people differently than how I would want to be treated, fairly, respectfully, equally. And that's really what this conversation is about. Whether you believe in big government or small, do you believe in fair, respectful, equal? Is it ever okay to say, well, except for those people? I feel like I'm at the Oscars. I see the red sign. Lawmakers before us, you, all over this nation have had conversations about equality, respectability, and fairness. We've all taken our history classes and could come up with our own list of instances. What were the polls like for those issues? Was everyone ready when our elected officials took the reins and led our communities, state and nation, so those laws were changed? Voting no today, this session, might seem politically expedient. But I can tell you from experience that you will have to live knowing that a no vote is not fair, it's not respectful, and it's not equal. I blew my vote, and I'm imploring you, please get this right. Minnesota citizens just want you to lead.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Osterman. Next testifier will be Gabe Aberhold, and subsequent to that will be Mr. Tom Horner.
Good morning, Chairman and the rest of the committee. My name is Gabe Aderhold, and I'm a freshman at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities studying political science. Grew up in Edina, Minnesota. I'm here today to testify in support of the marriage equality legislation. Today you've heard a lot from both sides of the aisle, and people in support of marriage equality have stated why they believe it is in the best interest to pass this legislation. They've spoken primarily on the grounds of wanting to be in a loving, get the legal recognition of being in a loving, committed relationship. And I'd like to, as a person, a young person that's not in one of those long-term relationships, give a different perspective. When I was in middle school, I knew there was something different about myself. I discovered that I was gay, and even though my family, my church, my community was completely accepting, I did not find this okay. I spent many nights very upset with myself and very troubled by this realization of mine. And over the years, I found out that if all these areas around me were so supportive, what was it? What was it that caused so much hardship? And it is what institutions like these and society as a whole have caused. And I am here to tell you that all of you have a responsibility on behalf of creating an inclusive, a smart, a supportive environment for GLBT youth like myself and the millions, well, thousands of others across the United States as well. It is just so important that not only does the marriage equality legislation allow for that legal benefits for gay and lesbian couples, but people like myself, it gives us the grounds of feeling good and feeling accepted in our society. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Aberhold. The final testifier for this morning will be Mr. Tom Horner. And members, we will recess and reconvene at 6 o'clock after Mr. Horner's testimony in this same room, in room 10. Mr. Horner, please introduce yourself for the record.
Fortunately, I'm accustomed to finishing last. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today. My name is Tom Horner. Over my nearly 40-year career, I've had the good fortune to work closely with some of the most influential and thoughtful Minnesota business, community, and policy leaders. And while they differ in many ways, they all agree on two essential keys to the success of our state. First, they agree that Minnesota's greatest asset is our workforce. We have a population of well-educated, innovative, and productive people. And second, the growth in the working-age population will remain flat for years to come. Economic growth depends on attracting and retaining the best and the brightest workers. Over the years, we have fared well in this competition for talent. Young, educated professionals from around the country have migrated to Minnesota because of the many assets we offer. Talented professionals came and stayed in Minnesota, though, for another reason. They found innovative employers who are among the nation's leaders in creating diverse, welcoming workplaces. In particular, gay and lesbian couples found a home in which they could prosper, raise families, and become part of a supportive community. Now, though, the bar has been raised. Respected business publications like The Economist report that companies are in serious competition to create welcoming environments. This isn't just to attract and retain gay and lesbian professionals. Compelling data have definitively concluded that communities with welcoming environments are most appealing to the majority of all young, well-educated professionals. Employers can only do so much. Public policy needs to catch up with public attitudes and public realities. Treating all Minnesotans equally by extending the freedom to marry to same-sex couples is the right thing to do. But it also is the smart thing to do as we build a state where all Minnesotans can prosper and all families can thrive. The legislation being discussed today will help do just that, and I urge you to support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Horner. Members and members of the public, as stated, this committee will be in recess. We will reconvene at 6 o'clock. Unfortunately, there are limited seats in this room at 6 o'clock, so members who are scheduled to testify at 6 o'clock, the remaining members of the public will be allowed